Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingracia.
Hey guys, thank you for being with me today for this episode of the Power of Purity podcast. I appreciate you being here. And if you were with me last week, you know that I began a new episode that I entitled When Your Wife Doesn't Like Sex. And this episode is based upon a letter that I received from a brother asking for some advice and guidance because he's been married for 15 years and his reality is that he wants to have sex with his wife, but his wife is not that interested in sex, and therefore sex does not happen nearly as much as he would like, and this provokes a deep struggle for him. And therefore, I crafted 8 principles that I wanted to share with him that I'm doing in the context of these podcast episodes. So in the way of reminder, I'm going to start today's episode by reading his letter one more time, and then we will continue with the 8 principles that I'm sharing in response. So here's his letter. Hello there. I've been married for almost 15 years to the love of my life. We have 3 amazing young sons, and we all love and follow Jesus. For a long time now, I've been searching and seeking answers from God and looking for support and feedback and perspective from other Christian husbands on sexual issues. Specifically, what men do when their wives just aren't into sex very much. I yearn for my wife, and I know she also loves me, is attracted to me, and we have a vibrant relationship, but she has very little desire for sex and is just fine cuddling at night. Early on in our relationship, we made love more frequently, prior to kids, but she has communicated to me that most of that was to make me happy and not because she enjoyed it as much as me. Before you read too much into that last part, I work really hard to work on real intimacy, to make sure our actual relationship is healthy and fresh so that physical intimacy can be a natural byproduct, and I'm very attentive to her needs sexually and actually find it most exciting to meet her needs over mine. I know she is tired and needs more sleep than I do. I know women naturally think about sex way less than us guys. I'm in psychology for the last 15 years and understand all the facts and data. What I'm having a hard time with is not just the once per week and on the weekend, if the kids cooperate and we can make love during the day stuff. It's what to do with my sexual desire for my wife when she shows little to no interest and I'm left laying next to her in bed, usually naked. I don't want to masturbate because I almost always need an image to do that, and I don't want to look at porn. Biologically, I need a release, but it's deeper than that. I want my wife. I'm not just horny. I have a lot of married Christian brothers, but everyone is busy with their own lives, and it's hard to find a place for these private but very important conversations and to find accountability, support, and perspective on these things. I just want to know what others do when they experience this. How do they cope? What is their perspective on sex and variance in drive between them and their wives? How do Christian couples reconcile 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 6, about our bodies belonging to our spouse and not depriving one another except for a mutually agreed upon time and reason? My wife does not buy that. She thinks it's misogyny or only relevant for the historical time that it was written. Of course, I'm never going to force my wife to do anything, but I also agree with the Word when it talks about married sex keeping men from temptation and lust. And I don't want my wife to feel obligated to make me happy. I want her to be turned on and to want to make love to me. Please help a brother out. Any resources or forums, chat rooms you can point me to would be much appreciated. Thanks and blessings on you. So with that letter being read, guys, last week I shared several introductory thoughts in response to this letter. And I said that I have 8 principles that I wanted to share in response. And I shared the first 3 last week, which were these. Number 1, ask your wife what she wants or needs. Number 2, acknowledge the tension between 2 significant principles related to sex in marriage. The first one is the 1 Corinthians 7 passage, which basically teaches that husbands and wives should be available to one another sexually. And the second principle, that no person should ever be compelled under any circumstance to have sex whatsoever, even in the context of their marriage, in violation of their own conscience or personhood. And the third principle is the reality that a man is responsible for his own sexual purity and his sexual integrity with or without the help that he would prefer from his wife. And that brings us to the fourth principle where we will continue today. But before I share this fourth principle with you guys, I want to offer a disclaimer, and that is that I want to acknowledge that I don't even claim to be that smart, and therefore I encourage you guys to relate to my material the way you would to a good steak dinner. Take the meat and throw away the bones, because I'm not sure, but I suspect that when I say this fourth principle, that not everybody will necessarily agree with me. There might be people who disagree with me, but I do believe this principle with all my heart. But I fully acknowledge and recognize and give you permission to disagree with me. If you do disagree, I would only ask that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you happen to disagree with any particular point that I'm presenting, go ahead and disagree with that point, but don't throw everything away. Decide what can you agree with and what do you disagree with, and take the best and leave the rest. But anyway, with that being said, my fourth principle is this. It's God's will, design, and plan that a married couple extravagantly, and notice, guys, I'm using the word extravagance here because I believe it's true. It's God's will, design, and plan that a married couple extravagantly enjoy and indulge in sexual desire, passion, and ecstasy with one another. And I believe that this is true. I believe God always intended sex to be this wonderful, marvelous, amazing, extraordinary, extravagant, beautiful, awesome, mysterious, and delicious gift that He intended for humanity. God is a genius. God created them male and female. He created penises and vaginas, and He created everything to work so perfectly the way that it works, that a man can get an erection and a woman can lubricate, and that a man has 4,000 nerve endings in the end of his penis that create these amazing sensations and these delicious feelings and this sense of euphoria. And a woman's clitoris has 8,000 nerve endings that create this amazing capacity for passion and extravagant desire and pleasure and ecstasy. So I think all of that says something of God's heart and mind and intention and design for human sexuality. God intended this thing to be unbelievably pleasurable and satisfying and euphoric. And He wants us to enjoy this and to indulge in it, and for it to be passionate and desirable, and to create ecstasy between a husband and a wife. And if I had to pick a proof text for my point here, I could point to at least a couple passages, although I think there's many that we could select. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 28, it gives us a glimpse of God's design and intention through creation. Verse 26 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground, So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it." So it's interesting to note that God's design and plan was to create them male and female, and that as soon as he created them, it says that he blessed them, and the very first words that God spoke over them together was, "Be fruitful and increase in number." In other words, God blessed their sexuality. He blessed their sexual union. He blessed their sexual pleasure. Of all the things God could have said, the first words that God would speak, it says that he blessed them and he blessed their sexual union. And I just think that's significant because it reveals God's intention that sexuality be a blessing. And then in this next passage I'm going to share with you from the Song of Songs, before I read the passage, I want to point out to you that as this young man is describing his lover, he starts at the top of her head and he works his way down. What's up at the head? The hair, the eyes, the teeth, the lips, all these things. But he works his way down her body. And this is Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. "How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Your eyes behind your veil are doves. Your hair is like a flock of goats descending from the hills of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn, coming up from the washing. Each has its twin, not one of them is alone. Your lips are like a scarlet ribbon. Your mouth is lovely. Your temples behind your veil are like the halves of a pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built with courses of stone. On it hang 1,000 shields, all of them shields of warriors. Your breasts are like 2 fawns, like twin fawns of a gazelle that browse among the lilies. Until the day breaks and the shadows flee, I will go to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of incense. You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you." And I think it's very beautiful and poignant the way he says that her breasts are like 2 fawns, twin fawns of a gazelle that browse among the lilies. And until the day breaks and the shadows flee, I will go to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of incense. And what do you guys think is the mountain of myrrh and the hill of incense? And he says that he will go there until the day breaks. And he says that she is altogether beautiful, that she is his darling, and there is no flaw in her. This speaks of sexual indulgence and extravagance and enjoyment and ecstasy. And there's a sense of great pleasure and indulgence in eroticism occurring between these two lovers, which I think is exactly what God always intended to happen between a husband and his wife, between a wife and her husband in the context of marriage. And the last passage I wanted to share is taken from Proverbs chapter 5, and I absolutely love this passage. The word intoxicated is used 2 different times, and the young lover is acknowledging that he is so enjoying the pleasures of his wife that he literally is becoming intoxicated. And I recently did a podcast series called The Human Brain, Neuroplasticity, and Porn Addiction. And I talked about how that when we have a sexual experience, that it releases these 4 feel-good chemicals in our brain, which are dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And these are feel-good chemicals, and they create this sense of pleasure and bonding and euphoria and satisfaction. And I believe that's what he's referring to in this passage taken from Proverbs chapter 5. beginning in verse 15. Drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets, your streams of water in the public squares, let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breast satisfy you always. May you ever be intoxicated with her love. Why, my son, be intoxicated with another man's wife? Why embrace the bosom of a wayward woman? So I believe that God is giving us permission to be intoxicated with one another within the context of our marriage. God wants us to experience these explosions of dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin and endorphins within the context of our marriage. He says to the young man, let her breast satisfy you. May you be intoxicated with her love. In other words, get drunk, have pleasure, experience euphoria, experience ecstasy. This is a gift that I've given you, a wonderful, marvelous, overwhelming, spectacular, mysterious, delicious gift that I want you to enjoy. So again, my fourth principle is this. I believe that it's God's will and design and plan that a married couple extravagantly enjoy and indulge in sexual desire, passion, and ecstasy with one another. And with that said, it therefore brings me to principle 5, which is this. This means that if a married couple is not experiencing mutually satisfying and fulfilling sex on a regular basis, something is wrong. And again, you have permission to disagree with me, but I believe this with all my heart. If it's true that God gave this to us as a gift, and He wants us to enjoy it, and it's intended to be this wonderful, pleasurable, mutually satisfying, euphoric, delicious gift that creates ecstasy and intoxication between a husband and a wife. If we therefore are not enjoying that in the context of our marriage, then something is wrong. That's not the way that God intends it to be. Or maybe here's another way to say it. I don't believe that duty sex is the way God intends sex to be within the context of a marriage. If a couple comes to the place where they almost never have sex, they have little to no sex, or the sex they have is essentially duty sex, where one of the partners is saying to the other, I really don't want to do this, I could care less, but I know that you want to do it, therefore, okay, I'll do it, go ahead, get this over with. I'm doing it because I have to do it, not because I really want to do it. Then it speaks of something being wrong. Something is diminished, something is broken, something is dysfunctional. This is not the way that God wants our sexual experience to be with our spouse within the context of our marriage. And in view of that, I'd just like to mention that earlier in the podcast, episodes 43 through 48, I did a series called When You or Your Spouse Doesn't Like Sex. And in this series, I identified the 4 primary reasons, typically, that a person does not like sex within the context of their marriage and what to do about it. So if you feel like you're in a place where you can relate to this or that this might be helpful, I might encourage you to go back and listen to that podcast series, When You or Your Spouse Doesn't Like Sex, because it's going to help you understand what might be going on there and what you can do to try to help that situation and maybe begin to experience sex in a healthier way in the context of your marriage. But I identified 4 relationships there. That's the way that I couched it. 4 relationships that can cause a person to not like sex. And those 4 relationships are you and your relationship with your spouse. if you and your spouse don't get along, if you're not friends, if you don't like each other, if the husband is mean or cruel or insensitive or unkind, if he never helps around the house, he's critical, all these kinds of things, then of course, that's not going to be conducive to a very healthy relationship, and therefore it's not conducive to a healthy sexual relationship. And therefore, sometimes if you want the sex to get better in your marriage, maybe the relationship needs to get better. So that's the first one. The second one is you and your relationship with sex. And the fact is that sex often represents one of the deepest hurts and most broken and shameful and painful areas of a person's life and soul. Things that happened to them maybe earlier in their life, things that they themselves did or participated in that they now carry deep shame around, so they're not comfortable with sex. They have unfinished business between them and sex. And therefore, this stuff has a way of following you into your marriage. I think this was very true in my own situation. I think the deepest pain and hurt and shame for my wife was around her sexual self. And things happened before I ever even met her or knew her. And she had never ever dealt with this stuff. And it followed her like her shadow into our marriage. And it therefore affected who I could be with my wife, who she could be with me as husband and wife. And we were affected by her past relationship with sex. So sometimes people have work to do in their relationship to be healthier sexually, and sometimes they have work to do in their relationship with sex in order to be healthier sexually. The third relationship is you and your relationship with your body. And what I mean by that is the physical, organic body that you live in. Because sometimes things can be maladjusted in your physical body. Your brain cannot be functioning right, hormone levels and various deficiencies and things that can be out of alignment in your physical body that cause a very diminished level of sexual desire or interest. And this was also true in my personal situation. So I think there can be a value if a person is struggling with a significantly diminished sexual desire or interest to go to your doctor, get a physical, get a blood panel done, check your hormone levels, check the testosterone level, check the estrogen level, and all these different things. And sometimes by working on the actual physical, organic body that you live in and helping your body be better adjusted within itself, it's going to help that sexual desire to come back and be healthier. And then the fourth relationship that I mentioned in this podcast series, when you or your spouse doesn't like sex, is you and your relationship with yourself. And what I mean by that is that sometimes a person can be experiencing diminished sexual desire and or interest because of the relationship they have with themselves. They have a very low opinion of themselves. They have a very low self-image, a low self-esteem. They don't like themselves. They're very critical of themselves. Maybe a person doesn't like their hair. They don't like the shape of their body. A woman doesn't like her breasts. She thinks her nose is too big. She doesn't think she's attractive. She doesn't feel good about herself. She feels like she's out of shape. She feels like she's overweight. A person isn't comfortable in their own skin, and therefore when a person doesn't feel good about themselves, it makes sense that their sexual desire will be diminished. How can I feel good about being naked with you and being with you? I don't even like to be naked with myself. I don't like to look at myself in the mirror. I make myself uncomfortable. I don't like myself. Therefore, if I'm not comfortable with me, how am I going to be comfortable with you when I'm naked with you, or I'm trying to be intimate, or we're trying to be sexual? Therefore, my desire might be greatly diminished or negated because of these things. So again, I just believe that if a couple is not experiencing sexual satisfaction and fulfilling sex on a regular basis, something is wrong, because I think God intends that to be a gift to our marriage and to our lives. And therefore, sometimes we have work to do, that we have to figure out, why is my desire so diminished? Why don't I want to have sex? Why don't I enter into this ecstasy and this euphoria and this pleasure? Why is this diminished for me? And this leads to what I think is a really, really big question, you guys, which is basically, is a person willing to explore this question? Why don't I like sex? Why is my desire for sex so diminished? Why could I take sex so little? Why could I take it or leave it? Why is my desire so diminished? And if a person is willing to ask that question and then go on a journey to explore and try to find the answers, does it have to do with me and my husband, me and my wife? Is it our relationship that needs work? Does it have to do with me and my relationship with sex? Is there stuff from my past that I have unfinished business, that I'm carrying shame and a sense of pain in my soul that I need to deal with? Does it have to do with me and my physical, organic body? Maybe my hormone levels are messed up. Could I maybe work on that, and then I would have more sexual interest and desire? Could it have to do with me and my relationship with myself? Maybe I have work to do to get in a better relationship with myself, so I feel better about myself, so then I can feel better about being with my spouse sexually in the context of my marriage. And with that being said, guys, it brings me to the sixth principle, which I'm going to go ahead and share. And the sixth principle, in response to this man's letter, what should I do about the fact that my wife doesn't want sex? The sixth principle is this: there is help available if a person is willing to do the work necessary in order to become healthy sexually. And I think this can apply to individuals and to couples. If a couple is in the place where they are not healthy sexually, where sex is not working between them in the context of their marriage, if one person has a higher desire than the other person, if one person has little to no sexual desire, if this is causing tension and conflict and hurt and disappointment and confusion in your marriage, then I just want to encourage you to realize that there is help available if a person or a couple is willing to do the work. Maybe an individual, maybe the wife in the marriage has work to do, maybe the husband, maybe the couple together. The fact is that Sherry and I were an absolute mess for many, many years in our marriage. And I had work to do, and my wife had work to do, so that we could each get healthier in our relationship with ourselves, and our relationship with sex, and our relationship with our past. And as we were doing that work through our therapeutic process, we were getting healthier as individuals, and that allowed us to come to the place where we could begin to do work as a couple, where we could begin to move toward one another and close this big gap that had existed between us for so many years. And we began to get healthier because we were willing to do the work. We went to counseling for over 6 years. And we began to deal with all these issues, these root issues that we didn't understand, that we had brought into our marriage, like this extracurricular baggage that was weighing us down, that we didn't understand and that we had never dealt with. And as we got into this therapeutic process, it helped us to unpack our hearts and our lives and our past and our story and our feelings. And it allowed us to work through some things that we could process and deal with, which allowed us to get in a better place so that we could become healthier together sexually. There are many books out there, and there are conferences, and there's doctors, and there's counselors, and there's psychologists and psychiatrists, and all these resources can help you get healthier if you're willing to go on this quest and to do the work that you need to do. There's no reason that a married couple who is not functioning well sexually, if they haven't been functioning sexually well for the past 10 years, I do not believe that you're doomed to live the next 20 or 30 years the same way that you've been living the past 10 years, because things can get better. Things can get healthier. Things can get more functional. Things can get healed. Things can be redeemed. And you can move toward one another in your marriage. And your sexual relationship can get better than it's ever been. And if I had to choose a proof text for this point, I'd choose what's one of my favorite verses in the Bible, Psalm 147, verse 3. And it says this, "He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds." And I love this scripture because it speaks of God's redemptive intention for us. When we are broken and we have wounds, God doesn't want us just to sit there and to wallow in it and to stay broken and to keep these wounds for the next 10 and 15 and 20 and 30 years. God wants to do something about it. He has a redemptive intention. He heals the brokenhearted and He binds up their wounds. So if you're willing to go on this quest, if you're willing to journey on the healing path that God has intended for your life and for your marriage, and specifically for the sexual aspect of your marriage, then I believe God is going to prove Himself faithful, and He's going to work deeply and powerfully in your heart and your life and your soul and your marriage and your sexual self. And He's going to help you get healthier than you've ever been. And He's going to help you move toward your spouse. He's going to help you guys come together sexually and get more alignment and more orientation. And He's going to help you move into that previous principle, which I began today's podcast with, which was the fourth principle I'm sharing in response to this man's letter, which was that it's God's will, design, and plan that a married couple extravagantly enjoy and indulge in sexual desire, passion, and ecstasy with one another. And with that said, guys, I see that I'm over time for today's episode. We have now covered 6 of the 8 principles that I have to share. So it looks like we're going to have one more episode to finalize this little series that I've entitled, When Your Spouse Doesn't Like Sex. And the 6 principles that we've now covered are this. Number 1, ask your wife what she wants or needs. Number 2, acknowledge the tension between 2 significant principles related to sex and marriage. Principle 1 is that 1 Corinthians 7 says that married couples should be available to one another sexually, but at the same time, no person should be compelled to have sex at any time against their own conscience or personhood. The third principle is that every man is responsible for his own sexual purity and integrity with or without the help or participation of his wife. Principle 4, it's God's will, design, and plan that a married couple extravagantly enjoy and indulge in sexual desire, passion, and ecstasy with one another. Principle 5, this means that if a married couple is not experiencing mutually satisfying and fulfilling sex on a regular basis, that something is wrong. And Principle 6, there is help available if a person is willing to do the work necessary in order to become healthy sexually. Praise be to God. Guys, thank you for being here for this episode. I'll look forward to seeing you next week, where I will share the 2 final principles in response to this man's letter. When my spouse doesn't like sex. God bless you. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, have a great week. Have a great day. Be blessed as you continue on your journey of purity. In Jesus' name, I'll see you then. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.